She was blind, but somehow she could see what no one else could. When 12-year-old Clementine Shaw placed her small hands on that blindfolded horse at the traveling fair, her words would shatter everything her father believed about life and death. "Papa," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Mama's here. She's in this horse." The morning air carried the scent of sawdust and cotton candy as Boone Delaney guided his daughter through the crowded fairgrounds. Clementine's fingers traced the rough wooden posts of vendor stalls, her head tilted slightly as she navigated by sound alone. The traveling fair had arrived 3 days ago, bringing excitement to their small frontier town for the first time since her mother's death 2 years prior. Boone watched his daughter's face light up at the sounds around them, children laughing, carnival barkers calling out their wares, the distant melody of a fiddle player. Since losing his wife Sarah to fever, he'd struggled to bring joy back into their quiet ranch house. This fair felt like a chance to see Clementine smile again, really smile, the way she used to when her mother was alive. "Tell me what you see, Papa," Clementine said, her hand finding his weathered palm. It was their ritual. He would describe the world for her, painting pictures with words that helped her understand the colors and movements she could never witness. "There's a man juggling 3 red balls near the pie stand," Boone began, his voice softening as he spoke to his daughter. "A woman in a blue dress is selling ribbons that flutter in the breeze like butterfly wings. And over there, past the ring toss game, there's something that might interest you." Clementine's head turned toward the direction he indicated, her keen hearing picking up sounds he was only beginning to notice. The gentle snorting of horses, the creak of leather, and something else, a rhythmic thumping that seemed almost like a heartbeat. "Horses," she said simply, her face brightening with genuine excitement. Boone nodded, forgetting for a moment she couldn't see the gesture. "A horse show of some kind. Want to take a look?" As they approached the makeshift arena, Boone could see a small crowd gathered around a circular pen. Inside, a young man who couldn't be more than 20 was working with a magnificent chestnut mare. What struck Boone as odd was the black cloth tied around the horse's eyes, and the gentle, almost reverent way the trainer moved around the animal. "Ladies and gentlemen," called out a woman with graying hair and knowing eyes, "you're witnessing something special here. Tobias Marsh has a gift with troubled horses, animals that others have given up on. This mare here lost her foal just weeks ago, and she's been refusing human contact ever since." Clementine tugged on her father's sleeve. "Papa, can we get closer? I want to hear better." Boone led her to the wooden fence that surrounded the pen. Clementine immediately placed her hands on the rail, her entire body becoming still as she focused on the sounds within the arena. The horse's breathing, the soft whispers of the trainer, the subtle shift of hooves in the dirt. It all seemed to speak to her in ways Boone couldn't understand. The trainer, Tobias, moved with surprising grace around the blindfolded mare. His hands never quite touched her, but somehow he seemed to be communicating through presence alone. The horse's ears swiveled toward him, following his movements despite her covered eyes. "Why is she blindfolded?" Clementine asked quietly. An older woman standing nearby overheard and answered before Boone could respond. "That's Magnolia Voss," she whispered to Boone, then addressed Clementine directly. "Sometimes, child, when we can't see with our eyes, we see with our hearts instead. That mare lost something precious, and right now the world is too bright, too harsh for her to face. The blindfold helps her find peace." Clementine's grip tightened on the fence rail. Something in the woman's words seemed to reach deep inside her, and Boone noticed his daughter's breathing had changed, becoming deeper and more focused. "Papa," Clementine said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need to touch her." Boone felt his stomach tighten. "Clementine, that's not safe. She's a wild animal and, please." The word came out so softly, yet with such intensity, that Boone found himself looking toward Magnolia Voss, who had been watching their exchange with curious eyes. Magnolia approached them, her weathered face kind but serious. "The child has something to say, doesn't she?" she asked Boone, but her attention remained fixed on Clementine. "My daughter gets these feelings sometimes," Boone said carefully. "Ever since her mother passed, she's been more sensitive to things I can't explain." Tobias had finished his work with the mare and was leading her toward a small gate at the side of the pen. The horse moved reluctantly, her head low, every step seeming to carry the weight of grief. "Tobias!" Magnolia called out. "Bring Luna over here. We have someone who might understand her pain." Boone's protective instincts flared. "Ma'am, I appreciate your kindness, but my daughter..." Has eyes that see what ours cannot, Magnolia finished gently. Trust me, Mr. Delaney. Sometimes the broken can heal the broken. As Tobias guided the blindfolded mare closer to the fence, Clementine's entire demeanor changed. She stood straighter, her hands reaching through the rails even before the horse arrived. When Luna's warm breath touched her fingers, Clementine gasped as if she'd been struck by lightning. But what happened next would haunt Boone for the rest of his life. The moment Clementine's palms made contact with Luna's neck, both the girl and the horse became perfectly still. Tears began streaming down his daughter's face, but her expression wasn't one of sadness. It was recognition, pure and startling. "Mama," Clementine whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "You're here. You're really here." The words hit Boone like a physical blow, and he felt the world begin to shift beneath his feet. Because in that impossible moment, watching his blind daughter connect with a grieving horse, he couldn't shake the feeling that something beyond his understanding was unfolding before his eyes. And Luna, the mare who had refused all human contact for weeks, pressed her blindfolded head against Clementine's small hands, as if she, too, recognized something precious and lost. The silence that followed Clementine's words stretched like a taut rope ready to snap. Boone felt his hands tremble as he watched his daughter's face transform with an emotion he hadn't seen since Sarah's funeral. A mix of overwhelming joy and devastating sorrow that seemed too large for a 12-year-old to contain. "Clementine," he whispered, his voice hoarse with disbelief. "What are you saying?" But his daughter didn't answer. Her small hands remained pressed against Luna's neck, and both she and the mare stood frozen in what looked like communion. The blindfolded horse's breathing had synchronized with Clementine's, rising and falling in perfect rhythm. Around them, the carnival sounds seemed to fade into a distant hum. Magnolia stepped closer, her experienced eyes studying the scene with something approaching reverence. "In 40 years of working with animals," she murmured to Boone, "I've never seen anything like this. That mare hasn't let anyone touch her since we found her wandering the prairie calling for her lost foal." Tobias stood nearby, his young face pale with amazement. "She's been with us for 3 weeks, he added quietly. "We thought we'd have to put her down. She was dying of grief, refusing food, refusing comfort. But look at her now." Boone forced himself to look, though every instinct screamed that what he was witnessing couldn't be real. Luna's head remained pressed against the fence, but her body language had completely changed. The tension that had defined her movements moments before had melted away, replaced by something that looked almost like peace. "Papa," Clementine said suddenly, her voice thick with tears. "She's telling me about the night Mama died. She's showing me things I never knew." The words hit Boone like a sledgehammer. He grabbed the fence rail to steady himself, his knuckles white with strain. "Clementine, stop this. Your imagination is—" "Mama was scared," Clementine continued, her eyes closed tight as tears continued to flow. "But not for herself. She was scared for us, for you and me. She didn't want to leave us alone." Boone's breath caught in his throat. Those were thoughts he'd carried in his darkest moments, wondering if Sarah had suffered not just from the fever, but from the knowledge that she was abandoning her family. He'd never spoken those fears aloud, certainly not to Clementine. "She says she tried to stay," Clementine whispered, her voice growing stronger. "She fought so hard to stay, Papa, but when she couldn't anymore, she looked for another way to watch over us." Magnolia exchanged a meaningful glance with Tobias. "Child," she said gently, "what else is she telling you?" Clementine's hands moved along Luna's neck, her fingers tracing patterns that seemed to calm the horse even further. "She says Luna lost her baby too, a little colt, brown with white markings on his legs. He got sick during a storm and Luna couldn't save him." Tobias stepped forward sharply. "How could she know that? We found Luna alone on the range. There was no sign of a foal, no way to know." "Because they understand each other," Clementine said simply. "Loss recognizes loss. Mama knows what it feels like to leave someone you love behind." Boone felt his worldview cracking like ice in spring. He was a practical man, a rancher who dealt in facts and hard work. He didn't believe in spirits or supernatural connections. Yet watching his daughter communicate with this grieving horse in ways that defied explanation, he found his certainty crumbling. "This is impossible," he said, more to himself than anyone else. Clementine finally opened her eyes and turned toward his voice. Her face was radiant despite the tears, more alive than he'd seen her in 2 years. "Papa, impossible things happen when love has nowhere else to go. Mama couldn't hold us anymore, so she found another way. The mare suddenly lifted her head and let out a soft whinny, the first sound she'd made since approaching the fence. It was answered by another horse somewhere across the fairgrounds, creating a moment of connection that seemed to ripple through the air. "She wants us to take off her blindfold," Clementine said with startling certainty. "She's ready to see the world again." But as Tobias reached for the cloth covering Luna's eyes, a commotion erupted from the crowd behind them. Angry voices cut through the peaceful moment, and Boone turned to see a group of men pushing through the gathered spectators, their faces dark with suspicion and hostility. The peaceful connection between his daughter and the mysterious mare was about to be shattered by forces that threatened everything Clementine had just discovered. "That horse is cursed," bellowed a heavy-set man with a sheriff's badge pinned to his vest. "I'm Sheriff Caldwell, and I'm shutting this down before someone gets hurt." Behind him stood 3 other men, their faces grim with the kind of certainty that brooked no argument. Boone recognized them immediately. Reverend Pierce from the town church, Dr. Matthews, who had treated Sarah during her final illness, and Mayor Whitman, whose word carried significant weight in their small community. The peaceful moment shattered like glass. Luna immediately sensed the hostility in the approaching voices and began to back away from the fence, but Clementine's hands remained steady on her neck, somehow keeping the mare calm despite the brewing storm. "Sheriff," Magnolia said, stepping forward with the authority of someone accustomed to handling difficult situations. "There's no danger here. The child and the horse are—" "The child is disturbed," Dr. Matthews interrupted, his clinical voice cutting through the warm air. "I treated her mother during the fever, and I've seen how grief can twist a young mind. This display is unhealthy, possibly dangerous." Boone felt rage building in his chest, but before he could respond, Reverend Pierce spoke up. "Brother Delaney, you know I mean no disrespect to Sarah's memory, but what we're witnessing here borders on blasphemy. The dead don't speak through animals. This is either delusion or something far worse." "Get away from that creature, child," Sheriff Caldwell commanded, his hand resting on his gun belt. "I've heard reports about this traveling show. Strange happenings, unnatural occurrences. We don't need that kind of trouble in our town." Clementine's grip tightened on Luna's neck, and for the first time since touching the horse, she turned toward the approaching men. Though she couldn't see their faces, her heightened senses picked up everything. The aggression in their voices, the fear underlying their authority, the way the crowd was beginning to murmur with uncertainty. "Papa," she said quietly, "they're scared. They don't understand that some things are bigger than what we can explain." Mayor Whitman stepped closer to Boone. "Delaney, you're a respected member of this community. Don't let grief make you a fool. Take your daughter home before this gets out of hand." Tobias, who had been silently watching the confrontation, finally spoke up. "Gentlemen, I've been working with horses my entire life. What you're seeing here isn't unnatural. It's the opposite. It's the most natural thing in the world. 2 beings recognizing shared pain and finding comfort in each other. Don't lecture us." "Boy," Sheriff Caldwell snapped, "I want this fair shut down by sundown. Pack up your carnival tricks and move on." But as the sheriff spoke, something extraordinary happened. Luna, still blindfolded, turned her head directly toward the group of hostile men and let out a sound that was part whinny, part moan, a vocalization so filled with anguish that it seemed to pierce the very air. The effect was immediate and unsettling. Several people in the crowd stepped back, and even the sheriff's bluster faltered for a moment. The sound Luna made wasn't just noise, it was communication, raw and emotional, speaking to something primal in everyone who heard it. Clementine's face went pale. "Papa, she's showing me something else. Something about the night Mama died. Something you never told me." Dr. Matthews scoffed. "The child is having delusions. This needs to stop immediately." But Clementine continued, her voice growing stronger despite the opposition. "Dr. Matthews, you were there. You know what really happened in Mama's final moments. You know what she said that you've never repeated." The doctor's face went ashen, and Boone felt a chill run down his spine. Because in that moment, he realized his daughter was about to reveal something that would change everything, and not everyone wanted the truth to come to light. The confrontation was escalating beyond anyone's control, and the mysterious connection between Clementine and Luna was about to expose secrets that some people would do anything to keep buried. Dr. Matthews' face drained of all color, and his hands began to shake visibly. "The child doesn't know what she's saying," he stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. "Grief can create false memories. Hallucinations. She's not hallucinating, Clementine said with quiet certainty, her blind eyes seeming to look directly at the doctor despite her inability to see. Mama's showing me that last night. You came to our house when Papa was out checking the cattle. You told Mama her fever was breaking, that she was going to recover. Boone's heart lurched. He remembered that night vividly, returning from the pasture to find Sarah sitting up in bed for the first time in days, smiling weakly, but with hope in her eyes. The doctor had indeed said she was improving. But that wasn't true, was it, Dr. Matthews? Clementine continued, her voice carrying an authority that seemed far beyond her 12 years. You knew she was dying. You knew she only had hours left. But you lied to give her peace. The doctor took a step backward, his professional composure crumbling. I thought it was the humane thing to do. She was suffering, and I wanted her final hours to be free from despair. She knew anyway, Clementine said, tears streaming down her face. Mothers always know, but she was grateful for your kindness. She spent her last conscious moments writing something for Papa and me. Something she hid where she thought we'd find it someday. Boone felt the world spinning around him. Sarah had indeed seemed unusually focused in those final hours, insisting on being left alone for short periods despite her weakness. He'd assumed she was resting, gathering strength. The possibility that she'd been writing, planning, preparing for what she knew was coming. Where? He whispered, his voice breaking. Where did she hide it? Luna suddenly lifted her head and turned toward Boone, the blindfolded horse somehow sensing the intensity of his emotion. Clementine's hands followed the mare's movement, and her face took on an expression of deep concentration. She's showing me our house, Clementine said slowly. The loose floorboard under the window in your bedroom, Papa. The one that creaks when you step on it. She put it there the night she died, wrapped in her blue silk handkerchief. Boone's knees nearly buckled. He knew exactly which board Clementine meant. He'd been meaning to fix it for months but had never gotten around to it. Sarah had always teased him about that particular creak, saying it woke her when he got up early for the morning chores. Sheriff Caldwell, who had been listening with growing discomfort, stepped forward aggressively. Enough of this nonsense. You people are being manipulated by a clever con artist. The child probably heard about the loose board from someone else, and no one else knows about that board, Boone said quietly, his voice cutting through the sheriff's protest like a blade. Sarah and I never mentioned it to anyone. It was just between us. Reverend Pierce, who had been unusually quiet during Clementine's revelations, suddenly spoke up. Even if what the child says is true, communicating with the dead is forbidden by Scripture. This horse, this connection, it's not natural. It goes against God's design. But Magnolia stepped forward, her weathered face filled with gentle wisdom. Reverend, I've seen many things in my years with animals that your books might call impossible. But I've learned that love doesn't always follow the rules we think govern this world. Sometimes it finds a way to continue even when everything else has ended. Tobias nodded in agreement. Luna has been dying of grief for weeks. But look at her now. He gestured toward the mare, whose breathing had become calm and steady. She's found peace for the first time since we found her. And so has the child. How can that be wrong? Dr. Matthews suddenly grabbed Sheriff Caldwell's arm. We need to stop this before it spreads through the town. People will start believing in all sorts of supernatural nonsense. It's dangerous. But as the doctor spoke, Luna did something that silenced everyone present. The blindfolded mare walked directly to the fence where Clementine stood and gently pressed her muzzle against the girl's face. The gesture was so tender, so unmistakably maternal, that even the most skeptical observers felt something stir in their hearts. She's not just any horse, Clementine whispered, her voice filled with wonder. Papa, Luna belonged to Mama before she died. Mama had been visiting her in secret, riding her when the fever made her too restless to sleep. That's how they bonded. That's how Mama knew she could trust Luna to carry her love to us. Boone felt his world reshape itself around this impossible truth. Sarah had indeed disappeared some evenings during her illness, claiming she needed fresh air. He'd thought she was just walking around their property, but if she'd been riding, connecting with this horse, the revelation was about to tear apart everything he thought he knew about his wife's final days. And judging by the panicked look in Dr. Matthews's eyes, there were still more secrets waiting to be uncovered. The weight of Clementine's revelation settled over the crowd like a heavy blanket. Boone stared at Luna, trying to reconcile this blindfolded mare with the possibility that Sarah had known her, had found comfort in her during those painful final weeks. The idea seemed impossible, yet it explained so much about his wife's mysterious disappearances. "That's preposterous," Dr. Matthews said, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. Sarah was bedridden for most of her illness. She couldn't have been riding anywhere. "Not bedridden," Clementine corrected gently, her hand still resting on Luna's neck. "Restless. The fever made her feel trapped inside the house. She told you she was taking short walks, but she was actually meeting Luna by the old oak tree near Miller's Creek." Boone's breath caught. Miller's Creek was barely a 10-minute walk from their house, and Sarah had indeed claimed to be taking evening walks there during her illness. He'd offered to accompany her, but she'd always insisted she needed the solitude to think and pray. Tobias stepped closer, his young face serious with understanding. "That explains how we found Luna," he said quietly. "She was wandering near Miller's Creek when the traveling fair arrived. We thought she was a wild horse, but she was actually looking for something. Looking for someone. Looking for Mama," Clementine said, her voice filled with sudden sadness. "When Mama didn't come that last night, Luna waited by the oak tree. She's been waiting there every evening since, hoping Mama would return." Magnolia wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "That poor creature. We've been trying to break her of what we thought was a stubborn habit. Every evening, she'd pull toward that creek fighting us to get back there. We thought she was being difficult, but she was grieving." Sheriff Caldwell, growing increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation, made one last attempt to regain control. "Even if any of this wild story were true, it doesn't change anything. The horse is still dangerous, and this gathering is still disrupting public order." But his words were interrupted by a commotion from the edge of the crowd. A young boy came running through the spectators, his face flushed with excitement and fear. "Sheriff Caldwell," the boy called out, "my pa sent me to find you. There's trouble at the Delaney Ranch. Someone broke into the house, tore up the bedroom, something fierce. Looks like they were searching for something specific." Boone felt ice form in his veins. Someone had been in their home, in Sarah's room, while they were at the fair. The timing couldn't be coincidental, not when Clementine had just revealed the location of Sarah's hidden letter. "Who would do such a thing?" Magnolia asked, but her eyes were already scanning the faces of the men who had been so eager to shut down the gathering. Dr. Matthews avoided eye contact, his hands fidgeting nervously with his medical bag. Mayor Whitman suddenly seemed very interested in the ground at his feet. The atmosphere shifted as suspicion began to replace skepticism. "Papa," Clementine said urgently, "we need to get home. The letter, if someone was looking for it, that means it contains something important, something someone doesn't want us to find." Luna suddenly became agitated, sensing the tension in Clementine's voice. The mare began pawing the ground, and despite her blindfold, she turned her head toward the direction of the Delaney Ranch, as if she could sense trouble there. "She wants to come with us," Clementine said with certainty. "She wants to protect what Mama left behind." Tobias nodded grimly. "I'll saddle her up. If someone's willing to break into your house to find that letter, then Luna's connection to your wife might be the only way to uncover the truth." But as preparations began for the urgent journey to the ranch, Dr. Matthews quietly slipped away from the crowd, his face pale with what looked suspiciously like guilt. Whatever Sarah had written in that hidden letter, someone was desperate enough to commit crimes to prevent it from being discovered. The mystery was deepening, and the stakes were becoming dangerously high for a grieving father and his remarkable daughter. The ride to the Delaney Ranch felt like the longest journey of Boone's life. He held Clementine securely in front of him on his horse, while Tobias rode alongside them, leading Luna by her reins. The mare had calmed once they started moving toward the ranch, as if she understood they were finally going where she'd been trying to return all along. Sheriff Caldwell and several townspeople followed behind, though Boone noticed that Dr. Matthews had completely disappeared from the group. The absence felt ominous, especially given the doctor's increasingly nervous behavior during Clementine's revelations. As they crested the hill overlooking the ranch, Boone's heart sank. The front door stood wide open, and even from a distance he could see furniture scattered across the porch. Someone had indeed ransacked their home with violent desperation. "Papa," Clementine said softly, "Luna's getting excited. She remembers this place. She's happy to be coming home." The words struck Boone with unexpected emotion. If Sarah had truly brought Luna here during her illness, then this mare had been part of their family without him even knowing it. The thought that his wife had found comfort and companionship that he'd been unable to provide filled him with both gratitude and regret. They dismounted at the house, and Boone surveyed the damage with growing anger. Chairs were overturned, drawers pulled out and emptied, books scattered across the floor. But the destruction seemed focused. Whoever had done this was looking for something specific, just as the boy had reported. "The bedroom," Boone said grimly, and they made their way toward the back of the house. The sight that greeted them there was even more disturbing. Sarah's room had been completely torn apart. The mattress was slashed open, dresser drawers dumped out, and several floorboards had been pried up and left splintered. But as Boone looked more carefully, he realized something crucial. "They didn't find it," he said with sudden understanding. "Look at the damage. They were searching randomly, desperately. If they'd found what they were looking for, they would have stopped." Clementine had been standing quietly near the doorway, but now she moved with purpose toward the window. Luna, still blindfolded but somehow sensing where they were, began pulling gently on her reins toward the same area. "It's still here," Clementine said with certainty. "Mama's letter is still hidden. But Papa, we need to be careful. The person who did this will come back when they realize they didn't find it." Tobias secured Luna outside the window, and the mare immediately pressed her head against the glass as if trying to get closer to whatever lay inside the room. Her behavior was so specific, so directed, that even Sheriff Caldwell seemed impressed by her apparent understanding of the situation. Boone knelt beside the loose floorboard that Clementine had identified, the one that had always creaked under his weight. His hands shook as he worked the board free, revealing a small hollow space beneath. There, wrapped in Sarah's blue silk handkerchief exactly as Clementine had described, was a folded piece of paper. The letter felt weightless in his hands, yet he knew it contained something powerful enough to drive someone to crime. As he carefully unfolded the delicate paper, Sarah's familiar handwriting emerged, and his eyes immediately filled with tears. "My dearest Boone and Clementine," he read aloud, his voice breaking with emotion. "If you are reading this, then my fears have come true, and I am no longer with you. But I need you to know that my death was not what it seemed." The words hit the room like a thunderbolt. Sheriff Caldwell stepped closer, his earlier skepticism replaced by sharp attention. Magnolia, who had accompanied them to the ranch, gasped audibly. "Dr. Matthews has been treating me with medicine that makes my condition worse, not better." Boone continued reading. "I believe he is deliberately prolonging my illness for reasons I cannot understand. I have been riding Luna in the evenings to clear my head and think about what to do. She belongs to a rancher named Coleman who died last month, and she has been my only friend during these dark days." Boone's hands were trembling so badly now that he could barely hold the letter steady. The implications of what Sarah had written were staggering, transforming her death from a tragic loss to something far more sinister. "I have hidden evidence of Dr. Matthews's treatments in Luna's saddlebag," the letter continued. "If something happens to me, please find her and look for the small leather pouch. It contains samples of the medicine he gave me and notes about how it affected me. I pray I am wrong about my suspicions, but if I am right, then others may be in danger." The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone in the room was staring at Boone, but he found himself looking toward the window where Luna waited, the mare who had been carrying his wife's final desperate message for 2 long years. But before anyone could respond to the shocking revelation, the sound of approaching horses echoed from outside. Dr. Matthews had returned, and this time he wasn't alone. Dr. Matthews rode up to the house with 3 rough-looking men Boone didn't recognize, their faces hard and purposeful. The doctor's earlier nervous demeanor had been replaced by something far more dangerous, the desperation of a man with everything to lose. "Sheriff Caldwell," Dr. Matthews called out as he dismounted, his voice attempting authority but betraying underlying panic. "I've brought federal marshals to deal with this situation. This traveling carnival has been spreading dangerous superstitions, and now they're involved in breaking and entering." But Sheriff Caldwell wasn't buying the performance. His hand rested on his gun as he studied the 3 strangers. "Funny thing, Doc. These men don't look like any federal marshals I've ever seen, and their timing is mighty convenient, showing up right after we discover some interesting information." Tobias moved protectively closer to Clementine while keeping one eye on Luna, who had become increasingly agitated at Dr. Matthews's arrival. The blindfolded mare was pulling against her reins, her head turning toward the doctor as if she could sense his presence despite her covered eyes. "Papa," Clementine whispered urgently. "Luna knows him. She's afraid of him. He hurt Mama. And Luna remembers." Dr. Matthews's face went pale as he overheard Clementine's words. "The child is delusional. You can't base accusations on the fantasies of a grief-stricken girl and her supposed connection to an animal. Maybe not, Boone said, rising to his feet with Sarah's letter still clutched in his hand. But I can base them on my wife's own words. She wrote down everything, Doctor. Every treatment you gave her, every time her condition worsened after your visits. One of the supposed marshals stepped forward, his hand moving toward his weapon. That letter is evidence in a federal investigation. You need to hand it over immediately. Magnolia, who had been quietly observing the confrontation, suddenly spoke up with surprising authority. Federal investigation into what exactly? You boys better have proper documentation if you're claiming jurisdiction here. The tension in the air became thick enough to cut. Boone realized they were facing more than just Dr. Matthews's guilt. This was a coordinated effort to cover up something much larger than one woman's death. Sheriff, Tobias said quietly, we need to check Luna's saddlebag. If Mrs. Delaney was right about hiding evidence there, it might be the proof we need. Doctor, Matthews's composure finally cracked completely. That horse should have been destroyed months ago. I tried to have her shot when Coleman died, but she disappeared before I could arrange it. The admission hung in the air like a confession. Sheriff Caldwell drew his weapon, and the three fake marshals immediately responded by reaching for theirs. The peaceful afternoon was about to explode into violence. But Luna, who had been growing more agitated throughout the confrontation, suddenly reared up with a sound that was part scream, part battle cry. The blindfolded mare broke free from her loosely held reins and charged directly toward Dr. Matthews with a fury that seemed almost supernatural. She remembers everything, Clementine said with quiet certainty, as chaos erupted around them, and she's not going to let him hurt anyone else. Dr. Matthews scrambled backward toward his horse, his face a mask of terror as the mare he'd tried to have killed bore down on him. The fake marshals were shouting and drawing weapons. Sheriff Caldwell was yelling orders, and in the middle of it all, Clementine stood perfectly calm. Tobias, she called out above the noise, the saddlebag. We need to get the evidence before they destroy it. The young horse trainer nodded grimly and began moving toward Luna, who had cornered Dr. Matthews against the side of the house. The mare's blind charge had been precise and purposeful, as if guided by an intelligence that transcended normal animal behavior. The confrontation was reaching its climax, and the truth about Sarah's death was finally about to be revealed. But first, they would have to survive the desperate measures of men who would kill to keep their secrets buried. The standoff lasted only moments before Sheriff Caldwell's authoritative voice cut through the chaos. Drop your weapons, all of you! His gun was trained on the nearest fake marshal, and his years of experience showed in the steady confidence of his stance. Dr. Matthews, pinned against the house by Luna's imposing presence, was babbling desperate explanations. You don't understand. I was conducting medical research. Sarah volunteered to help test new treatments. Everything I did was legal. But Tobias had reached Luna's side and was carefully examining her worn leather saddlebag. His face grew grim as he felt the contents. There's something here, he called out. A small pouch, just like the letter said. Clementine, despite the danger surrounding them, walked calmly toward Luna. The mare immediately sensed her approach and became still, as if the girl's presence was the only thing that could soothe her rage. Easy, girl, Clementine whispered, placing her hands on Luna's neck. Mama's watching. She knows you protected her secret. Now let us finish what she started. The blindfolded horse lowered her head, allowing Tobias to carefully extract a small leather pouch from her saddlebag. Inside were several small glass vials, containing what appeared to be medicine samples, along with folded papers covered in Sarah's delicate handwriting. Sheriff Caldwell kept his weapon trained on the fake marshals, while extending his other hand toward Tobias. Let me see those papers. As Tobias handed over Sarah's hidden documentation, one of the supposed marshals made a desperate move toward his gun. But Luna, still blindfolded, somehow sensed the threat and reared again, her hooves coming down dangerously close to the man's head. He dove aside, abandoning his weapon attempt. Your wife was more observant than I gave her credit for, Dr. Matthews said bitterly, all pretense finally abandoned. She figured out that I was using patients to test experimental treatments for a pharmaceutical company back east. The money was too good to pass up. Boone felt a cold rage settle over him. You used my dying wife as a test subject? She was going to die anyway, Dr. Matthews shouted. The fever would have killed her within days. I just extended the process to gather valuable data. The confession hit everyone present like a physical blow. Magnolia stepped forward, her weathered face hard with disgust. You deliberately prolonged that poor woman's suffering for money? Sheriff Caldwell was scanning the papers Sarah had hidden, his expression growing darker with each page. These notes document systematic poisoning. You weren't treating her fever. You were causing it to worsen with experimental compounds. Clementine's hands remained steady on Luna's neck, but tears were streaming down her face. Mama knew she was dying, but she also knew you were making others suffer the same way. That's why she hid the evidence. She wanted to save other families from going through what we did. Dr. Matthews looked around desperately at his hired companions, but they had already abandoned their weapons and were backing away from the situation. The truth was finally out, and no amount of violence could put it back in the box. How many others? Sheriff Caldwell demanded. How many other patients did you experiment on? The doctor's shoulders sagged in defeat. 17 families over 2 years. The company promised me enough money to retire, to leave this frontier life behind. Tobias carefully removed Luna's blindfold, and for the first time in months, the mayor's eyes were revealed. They were intelligent, sorrowful, but no longer filled with the desperate grief that had defined her since Sarah's death. As if seeing clearly for the first time since losing her friend, Luna walked directly to Clementine and gently nuzzled the girl's face. She's saying goodbye, Clementine whispered, her voice filled with both sadness and peace. Mama's message has been delivered. Her work is finished. Boone approached his daughter, and the remarkable horse that had carried his wife's final act of love and justice. As he placed his hand on Luna's neck beside Clementine's, he felt something he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death, a sense of closure, of purpose, completed. Thank you, he whispered to the mayor. Thank you for taking care of her when I couldn't. Dr. Matthews was arrested that afternoon along with his hired accomplices. The evidence Sarah had so carefully preserved led to the exposure of the pharmaceutical company's illegal experiments and the prosecution of everyone involved. 17 families finally learned the truth about their loved ones' deaths and found the justice that had been denied them. Luna remained with the Delaney family, becoming not just Clementine's companion, but a living connection to Sarah's memory. The mayor's blindfold was never needed again. She had finally found peace in completing the mission Sarah had entrusted to her. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when Clementine rode Luna by Miller's Creek, Boone could swear he felt Sarah's presence watching over them both, her love having found a way to protect her family even beyond death. The bond between a mother and her child, it seemed, truly was stronger than any force in the world, even strong enough to speak through the heart of a faithful horse who refused to forget. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale where courage and mystery collide in the untamed frontier. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.